Um, Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first of many events that Women in Bio has for our Bio Digital Conference this year. We're kicking off with a diversity and inclusion event that I'm very excited about. My name is Cuella Valdez, and I'm the current WIB-National President and Board Chair. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, we're going to kick off our several event lineup for Bio this year with their disability inclusion, being an ally in a workplace. First, before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Women in Bio. Women in Bio is an organization that was founded in 2002, right here in the DC area where I reside, with a mission to advance the careers of all women in the life sciences. We're a volunteer-led organization of professionals devoted to diversity and inclusion through intentional outreach and allyship. WIB provides resources and professional and personal development for women from diverse backgrounds across all 14 chapters throughout North America and beyond. Women in Bio is also here for you every step of the way in your career, from the classroom to the boardroom. We truly provide every support and through a continuity of support through multiple of our programming, including our Young Women in Bio programming, which focuses on STEM outreach for middle school and high school age girls, through mentorship and leadership opportunities for early and mid-career individuals, as well as executive training at the highest levels through our Boardroom Ready program. All of this could not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. I'd personally like to thank our National Diversity and Inclusion sponsor, PNC Bank. And now I'll turn it over to Beth Marcello, Director of Women's Business Development at PNC. Beth.
Thank you, Cuella. Hello, everyone. And I'm so pleased to be here, and PNC is so pleased to support the important work of Women in Bio. If you're not familiar with PNC, we're based in Pittsburgh, and we're the 5th largest financial institution in the United States, thanks to our very recent acquisition of BBVA Bank. So if you're in a geography with BBVA bank branches today, you will begin to see those change over to PNC over Columbus Day weekend this October. PNC joined Women in Bio last fall specifically in support of your inclusion grants. This was a very natural fit for PNC. One of our 5 leadership standards is includes intentionally, because we know that inclusive behaviors don't happen by accident. And so we were very pleased to support your organization's intentional inclusion of women of color as well. The work of Women in Bio aligns also with a new PNC initiative that I'm excited to share with you. We're calling it Project 257, Accelerating Women's Financial Equality. So Project 257, the name comes from a World Economic Forum survey last year that found that at the current rate of progress, I use progress with air quotes, it will take women globally another 257 years to catch up to men economically. One reason for this gap is that women are underrepresented in the high growth and high income industries and professions that organizations like Women in Bio embraces. So by supporting organizations like yours, PNC hopes that we can help narrow the 257-year gap. I hope you'll learn more about how we're working to close the gap. You can visit our website, pnc.com/women, where you'll also find replays of our 11th annual Women in Business Week programs. We hold Women in Business Week every May. And so last month we hosted 9 programs. You'll find replays of them at pnc.com/women, as well as a variety of other resources that I hope you'll check out. So thank you so much for allowing PNC to be part of your organization, for the work you're doing to advance women. And thank you for the opportunity to say hello this afternoon. I'm looking forward to the program, and I hope you are as well. Back to you, Cuella.
Thank you so much, Beth. Appreciate it. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our national sponsors, including LifeSci Advisors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Horizon Therapeutics, Axiom at the NIH Federal Credit Union, Biogen, Pfizer, Biosurplus, CSL Behring, EY, Goodwin, Kilpatrick Townsend, and of course the bio organization. So now we'll get started for this exciting event. I'll go ahead and introduce our moderator for this event, and then I'll turn it over to you, Laura. So I'd like to get started introducing Laura Randa, our moderator. Laura is a global commercial executive who maximizes top and bottom lines in tight margin environments by elevating people, processes, and organizations' thinkings to new level. A transformational leader and valued member of executive teams, she has been recognized for providing practical and sustainable solutions to business challenges that impact large-scale, complex commercial operations. She is adept at designing and implementing customer-centric commercial strategies for driving growth and blends deep subject matter knowledge, big picture perspective, and keen business savvy with a transparent, engaging, and collaborative approach to deliver results in key performance areas. So I'll turn it over to you, Laura. I believe you're on mute, Laura, sorry.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Women in Bio and everybody and the panelists, Joyce, Tony, and Ted, for allowing us to kick off this bio-digital event with such an important topic. That work has been done, as you'll hear, and we've got some of the best leaders that have been involved in this for many, many years that have been making an impact. But what we now have is the challenge of what we're going to do in the next decade and what we're going to do in the next future. So absolutely thrilled that we're kicking off with this event. And one of the things that I wanted to kick off today was first is we're going to talk about the American Association of Business, the Business Roundtable that AAPD has just recently kicked off. Kayla, if you could go to the next slide. The Disability Advisory Roundtable has been kicked off in 2021. It's an opportunity for national advocates, corporates, organizational leaders, and allies from the Capitol Hill and community activists to advise and guide and bring our meaningful discussions around this disability rights community and leaders in both the public and private sector. I want to share this with you today, and it'll come up throughout our discussion and also in the meeting room, as we will want, as there is an opportunity for other companies to participate, and we'd love for you to get involved if your company is interested. Next slide. So these are some of the topics that we plan to cover. There will be 2 meetings this year with cross-functional representation from the companies involved. And then from going forward, we will have 4 a year. It'll be anything from veterans with disabilities to emerging leaders with disabilities and youth. We'll deal with policy, best practices in hiring and in training. We will talk about policy and advocacy. So many of the topics that we need to do to forward the topic and disability inclusion. Next slide, please. As you can see, we are off to an amazing start. You see some of the companies, you may see your own company up there. We are absolutely thrilled. We have, as you see, we have many biotechs up there. We have Regeneron, Bayer, GSK, and lots of other companies that have also recently shown interest and will be joining. We also have a lot of our partners. We have Bristol Myers Squibb. We also have companies like Anthem, Amerisource, and CVS Health. So lots of folks in the healthcare, and we're excited to expand it. Next slide. So there is this opportunity for everyone to participate. I will leave it at that. And, if anybody is interested in learning more about being one of the co-founding members that will be involved in these discussions to further advance workplace disability inclusion in the workplace, please feel free to reach out to me and, on LinkedIn, or we'll provide contact information as well. And I'd love to be able to tell you more. So with no further ado, what I would like to do, we have a very esteemed panel today. I would like to turn it over to the panelists to quickly introduce themselves. And, following that, we'll get started in the conversation. I will start. Ted, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Thank you, Laura. I'm Ted Kennedy, Jr. I'm here in my capacity as board chair of the American Association of People with Disabilities, one of the leading civil rights, public policy organizations dedicated to social reform and equal rights for people with disabilities. And I just want to say thank you to Women in Bio and to Kayla and Lisa, and of course to my friend Laura Randa and my colleagues Tony and Joyce for participating in this discussion. I'm really speaking just a brief word of background. As a amputee and pediatric bone cancer survivor, I've spent nearly my entire adult life fighting for equality and justice for people with disabilities, beginning as an appointee on the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities under President Ronald Reagan, to my current role as AAPD chair and as co-chair of the Disability Equality Index, now the leading corporate benchmarking tool for disability equality and inclusion. And I'm really proud to say that we have nearly half of the Fortune 500 companies participating in this benchmarking tool, but we hope to obviously expand that. We know, Tony, Joyce, and I all know that businesses play a key role in advancing jobs, economic independence, and justice for people with disabilities. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm also a healthcare regulatory attorney. That's what I do in my other life at a law firm called Epstein Becker Green. Some of you may know that only because we're one of the leading healthcare focused law firms in the country. I'm here and I'm pleased to say that I'm also on the board of a biotechnology company called Arvinas. It's a NASDAQ listed company based in New Haven, Connecticut. I understand that Women in Bio has a very active Connecticut chapter, so I'd love to meet the Connecticut chapter sometime. And I'm also pleased to say that four out of our 9 board members on the Arvinas board are women, not because they're women, but they are the most qualified people. And we have an incredible world-class board of directors of leading women in biotech. So we're here to say that we want to work with you. We want to work with each and every company to help you expand opportunities for people with disabilities. And I also invite you to check out our website, aapd.com, where you can learn more about some of the other issues that we're working on to advance disability inclusion. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ted, so much for being here. We'll flip to Tony. Tony, and please feel to introduce yourself. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for joining. You're on mute, Tony.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be on the call today. I'm a person with a disability. I have epilepsy, and I've been involved in the disability movement advocacy ever since. And when I was in Congress, I authored the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I'm excited to be here today to talk about including people with disabilities in the workplace, especially women. 25% of Americans have a disability and experience twice the unemployment rate of those without disabilities. For disabled women and for disabled women of color, the rates of unemployment are even more staggering. For me, this is my ministry, to rid the stigma that disabled employees cannot be as productive as non-disabled employees. With the right accommodations, nothing, and I mean nothing, could be further from the truth. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Tony, so much. And the final panelist, Joyce, thrilled to have you here today. Please introduce yourself to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the Women in Bio. I want to say about Laura that she told me one day, you know what, Joyce, I am going to make sure that we include disability inclusion at that conference. And just like that, it happened. And I want to thank you personally, Laura, for becoming a national disability advocate. It's an honor of mine to say that you are my friend And I am so honored to speak with Ted Kennedy and Tony, two friends of mine. Tony is my mentor, and I always tell him I'm his tormentor. But I am honored to be here. My name Joyce Bender, as I said, I'm headquartered right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And what a wonderful city. Let's add the Carnegie Mellon University is right here in Pittsburgh, so that many women have graduated with a STEM background. I am the founder and CEO of Bender Consulting Services. This is a for-profit company that focuses on the competitive employment of people with disabilities. And I am also the founder of the Bender Leadership Academy, helping young people with disabilities gain employment and deal with bullying. Most importantly, you know, as to all of this, I'm a woman living with epilepsy. I had an accident in 1985 and a seizure one night at a movie theater would change the rest of my life, so that I would spend my life on a crusade to find employment for people with disabilities. And that is one of the most important things, employment. As Tony and Ted both alluded to, people with disabilities have the highest unemployment of any group in America. And that's what I hope we can move forward to change. If you want to know more about Bender Consulting Services, go to benderconsult.com. And Laura, I'll turn it back over to you. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, let's get started in this wonderful conversation so people can learn more. Ted, I'm going to start a question your way first. As a chairman of American Association with People with Disabilities, what is your vision for disability inclusion in the workplace over the next decade? And why is disability inclusion an important business imperative?
Well, thank you, Laura. You know, we've made great progress, and Tony Cuella, who's on the joining us on the panel today, father of the Americans with Disabilities Act, worked in concert with my father on the Senate side, and working in a bipartisan way to finally address the final frontier of civil rights, which is the equality of people with disabilities. And we've made great strides. But still, there's still a lot that remains to be done, which is why we are all focusing on economic independence, because part of the national conversation is this discussion about income inequality. And as Joyce just mentioned, individuals with disabilities experience the greatest income inequality of any minority group in our country, which is really surprising because studies have shown how people with disabilities can actually drive business performance. And I allude to the recent report by Accenture called Getting to Equal, the Disability Inclusion Advantage. And it pointed out very definitively how companies that lead on disability inclusion have greater revenue, greater profitability, and most importantly for investors, 4 times more likely to outperform their peers in terms of total shareholder returns over time. And that is why disability inclusion is not just the right thing to do, but it actually leads to greater business performance, and why now shareholders and many of the leading institutional investors, and we're talking about Pittsburgh, for example, we have now the state pension plan of Pennsylvania, as well as leading pension organizations from across the world calling on corporate America to do more to advance individuals with disabilities. So it is the final frontier. Joyce likes to say, and I like to quote her, when you give somebody a job, you give them their freedom. It's as simple as that. And we're just asking for people to give somebody an opportunity, a chance. And, you know, and I've already spoken too long, Laura, so I'm sorry about that. But, you know, Joyce and Tony and I are always puzzled by the fact that healthcare companies, you know, many of them are some of the leading companies in the area of disability inclusion, but many of them are not, which is interesting because you would think that companies whose primary business is include rehabilitation or rare diseases or trying to solve some kind of chronic health condition. Yet they still do not have representation in the C-suite or in the board level and or advancing opportunities for people with disabilities within their organizations. And we're seeking to change that, hopefully starting right here, right now at this panel. Thank you.
Ted, thank you. Thank you so much. Lots for us to think on. Tony, I'll turn it over and see if you have any additional comments to add.
I think Ted is totally right. Our problem is that companies don't give us a chance to fail. If you give us the chance to fail, we then can succeed, but you don't give us that chance. And so what's important is getting companies to recognize, as Ted points out, that people with disabilities can be very effective for a company. Joyce points that out all the time. And it's what troubles me is that there is this stigma that gets applied to those of us with disabilities that we can't do X. But, you know, I'm a strong believer that somebody like me, there are certain things I can't do, but there's a lot of things I can do better than people without disabilities. So it's the same with all of us in the disability community. Sure, there are things we can't do, but that's true of everybody. And so give us a chance to fail. And so I think Ted's points are well taken.
Thank you so much, Tony. And Joyce, what words would you have to add on?
I would only say, Laura, that I think one of the key things that Ted and Tony are stressing is that hiring people with disabilities is not for charity, but for return on investment. And now, through this work that Accenture did, we have the data, we have the proof. That's the mindset that has to change. Is they've heard me say many, many times, people with disabilities want paychecks, not pity. People with disabilities want to work, but at the same time, when you hire people with disabilities, you are gaining on your return on investment. So I agree with what they're saying, what they've talked about.
And Laura, let me just make one more comment, and that is that one of the things about giving those of us with a disability a job, you then give us our dignity, really. We can then pay taxes. We can then participate in society like everybody else. We can buy or rent a home, buy a car, whatever, but we then can give back. And I've told the last 5 presidents, except the one just previous, that all of that if you, I shouldn't have said that, but I did mean it. I've told each of those 5 presidents that I only know one group in American society who wants to pay taxes. And that's those of us with disabilities, because that means we have a job. And so it's all this is very incumbent in regards to what I refer to always as stigma, but basically have given us the opportunity.
Well, certainly we can see, especially supported by the Accenture report, that business does matter when you include. And, you know, all of us know that data should drive our strategy. So lots to think about and also to challenge, you know, the future of our bio companies and organizations, you know, better profitability, better organizations, more inclusiveness. Tony, as father of the ADA, you've led a charge for over 30 years. You know, we have federal contractors that are required to have an affirmative action program that includes promoting employment of people with disabilities. Yet the GAO has found some failure to comply. How do we address that? We have lots of bio leaders on the phone with us today at this important conversation. How do we take that learning and actually pull it through in our organizations?
Well, it goes back, Laura, to the 70s. Basically, what we said was that federal contractors and subcontractors need to hire women, people of color, and the disabled. there was no facts at the time in regards to what was a disability. There were no facts in regards to how many people with disabilities, and there were no facts as to where people with disabilities lived. And so it took 25 years to put all that together. I and many others worked on that for those 25 years to get all that done. We finally were able then during the second term of President Obama to get them to look at the facts that had been developed, and that at that point we could implement the laws of the 70s saying that you had, as federal contractors, you had to employ people with disabilities. Now, the problem is that it was aspirational. We gave a 7% goal. Now, the problem there now is that federal contractors and federal subcontractors face no penalty for failing to submit an affirmative action program, despite receiving lucrative contracts to provide goods and services to the federal government. And you know what that means is airplanes, pencils, water, you name it, whatever they provide. And it's imperative that the approximately 85% of these contractors who the GAO identified as failing to develop their affirmative action programs comply with their contractual obligations to prepare their programs in a timely manner. Adding a demonstrated commitment requirement to the contracting process will assist greatly in compliance enforcement and the goal of equal employment opportunity for all identified groups, including women and minorities. This is something that we have to pursue, getting that demonstrated commitment when you apply to get that federal contract, because most federal contractors after the fact don't even respond in regards to what they did. So this is something that I and some others are working on right now to provide for this provision, that what is their commitment to getting this done? What history have they provided in regards to hiring women, people of color, and more importantly, from my point of view, people with disabilities. So we're working on this. This is the next step to get this done.
Fantastic. Thank you for helping us lead through that. And, you know, I always say if the federal government can do it and this important legislation, we out in the biotech and our companies, our leadership should also be able to do it as well and mirror that good policy work that you're doing from that perspective. So there's the challenge, right? You know, mirror, you know, some of the work that's happening from the federal contractor level. I would offer Ted or Joyce, anything to add?
The one thing that I think is in just observing a national trend that is actually impacting many other disenfranchised groups that have gone before us is that people are becoming more aware and more involved, and people with disabilities are becoming more organized like never before, and beginning to learn about, you know, which companies truly share their values, and you know, which toothpaste they buy, what airline they fly on, where they buy their coffee. These are becoming much, much more important to individuals with disabilities and their families, which is one of the reasons why I think you're seeing such a renewed interest in now focus on the area of disability inclusion, because it's also not just about incorporating people with disabilities in their workforce. Everybody, even if you're able-bodied, most workers want to go to work every day knowing that the company that they work for has a vision, is standing up for the right thing, and stands for something. And that's again one of the things that we're working on. And you know, I'm excited to work with the biotechnology industry again, because I think there's so much good work that can be done, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Laura, and with Women in Bio.
Laura, let me make a comment what Ted just said before you call on Joyce. What Ted said is that those of us with disabilities are now aggressively involved. What you have to do is go back a bit. There was a time when those of us with disabilities were shoved aside and we had people speak for us, parents, friends, whatever. That has all changed now. Those of us with disabilities want to be spoken to directly. Those of us with disabilities want to participate directly in decision-making and so forth. That has all changed in the last, I would say 20 years, 15 years. And we're more aggressive now because it's our life. You're dealing with our life. You're dealing with what impacts us. And so now all of a sudden there's this aggressiveness on the part of those with us with disabilities to be included. So I just wanted to clarify that one point with Ted, because it's really important what has taken place in the disability community.
Thank you, Tony. And Joyce, what do you have to add?
I would only add to that, what they're talking about is clearly out of the shadows. For, as Tony talked about, for a long time, people with disabilities have been in the shadows, but now we're out. Now we're out and we're speaking up, as with AAPD, which I'm very honored also to be on the board of, but we are speaking up. We're no longer in the shadows. I want to mention, you were talking about federal legislation. With Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, which will impact all federal contractors on their aspirational goal of 7% hiring. But they're seeing more than that. They're seeing marketing has to include people with disabilities. Of course, employment, but in addition to that, digital accessibility. And I know Tony has talked about the extremely high percentage where our website is not accessible. And it's companies that are going to make a difference that are in digital accessibility, like Audio Eye and many others that are there. And you know what I'm saying? It's a whole picture. It's a whole picture. And that's what I'm excited about.
Laura, let me make a comment in regards to what Joyce has said, and I hope this is what you wanted, with some dialogue between us. But in regards to what Joyce has said about the internet, there's a group that does an analysis every 6 months as to accessibility of websites and the internet. And that group, independent group, the last determination, they pointed out that 98.2%, that's 98.2% of all websites are not accessible. So how do you expect those of us with disabilities to participate in society if the vehicle for information today is the internet? And I take that to sort of imply with what has gone on over the years for the interstate highway. We become the world's, in regards to commerce, movement of goods, the interstate highway. Now the interstate highway is the internet. That's where you can get information, you can buy goods, you can do everything else. Those of us with disabilities, we don't have that access. And so that is something, as Joyce pointed out, that I'm aggressively working on to try to get changed so that those that have websites have to comply with accessibility to the internet. Audio Eye, as Joyce pointed out, I'm on the board of it. That is our goal, is to make that happen. And we're going to make progress there, but that's a big one.
Great additional insight. I think we'll all have to go back and look at our websites right now and get cracking on it. There's a challenge. So, getting a little bit more operational, building on Tony and Joyce's comment around websites. Joyce, this one's for you. We'll start with you. What do you believe, as we're employers and we're hiring people with disabilities, what are some of the best practices for interviewing, for hiring and onboarding people with a disability? What do we need to think about?
Number one, you need commitment from the top. Any company I've worked with where I've been extremely successful, the commitment comes from the top. I talk about Highmark all the time. Why? Because the 1995, they helped me get started, but clearly that every CEO has stood behind me. And today that includes David Holmberg When you have that commitment from the top, PNC is the same way with Bill Demchak. It makes all the difference because it filters through the company. So that's number one. Number two, you were talking about how would you know what to do in those different areas. I'm very proud that my company, designed iDisability. iDisability is an e-learning software product. And what it does is teaches companies how to interview people with disabilities, like people with autism, how to deal with people who are deaf, all various disabilities, and understanding the correct linguistics, terminology, and right now, today in this country, mental health is so important for people with disabilities, and having all that training, and I'll tell you why I said that, Laura. Here I am since 1995. My crusade has been the employment of people with disabilities. And why I love that I'm getting to speak at Women in Bio, I've worked in the intelligence agencies, as I've told you before, such as the NSA. What's that mean? Replace people that are mathematicians, engineers, but at Highmark also epidemiologists, nurses with disabilities. And so often people don't realize that people with disabilities also have that academic background and can make a difference just as Women in Bio is making. And one other thing I'll say about that, when you ask about change, everyone who is watching this today has to remember that when you're thinking about, oh, how do I do this, hiring people with disabilities? Well, you already have. You have people working for you right now with bipolar disorder, epilepsy, depression, MS. I could go on and on, hidden disabilities, non-apparent disabilities. It's just they're not raising their hand saying that. And you know what that means, Laura? That means some of your top performers right now have disabilities. It's just you don't know that. And I'm hoping through what we're doing today with Women in Bio that that will be clear to everyone. Different people with disabilities, different skills across the board.
Thank you, Joyce. And I think, the one thing that people may want to do is check out your iDisability, and they can learn more about that on your website or reaching out to you, because it is a great tool. No, we're going to talk a lot about other things, best practices and policy and advocacy at the roundtable, but this will continue our conversation. This is the real focus of it. Ted, what would you have to add around that?
Well, I would just like to say, invite everybody to Google and check out the Disability Equality Index. The DEI is now the leading benchmarking tool for corporate America. In it, it's we look at 6 areas across an organization. It really is like an action plan for companies who are just beginning this journey of disability inclusion, and we can introduce you to other people who have started on this journey before. And so I invite you to check out the Equality Index and learn about, the best practices across the various industries.
And Tony, please feel free to add along.
Well, a couple of things that Joyce pointed out, and that I don't think we really appreciate, is that, as she said, many of the people that are probably on this call today have a disability and have not disclosed for lots of reasons. Now, what I like to talk about is that a lot of people with disabilities have been trained in a particular area by going to school or whatever. But the problem is they never got that opportunity to get a job. And the question is, can we get CEOs or others to give those of us with disabilities the entry job we need in order to develop our resume to proceed in the workforce? It's a big issue getting that first job. If you don't disclose your disability because you don't have to, you get that first job. Those of us with disabilities that are something that people can see or people can or whatever, we have a different problem in that we need that first opportunity and so forth. And the other thing I would say that Joyce pointed out is that when she goes to a company, leadership is what's important. She goes to the CEO and convinces the CEO that they need to include people with disabilities and give them that opportunity to fail. And the point is, I don't want to offend anybody on this call, but the problem we have is with HR people is they're reluctant to give that chance because they don't want to make a mistake and that'll impact their careers and so forth and so on. The reluctance is really big there. So that's why Joyce has to go to the CEO. And so I would hope that some of you that are on this call today would understand that that is a major issue for us. And it would be better if we had an opportunity with the HR people and others that they would give us a chance. Give us a chance to fail, but give us a chance to get that first opportunity to develop our ability to perform.
Laura, if I can just add a thought about what Tony said. Increasingly now, the commitment for disability inclusion, as Tony mentioned, is not coming from the HR department, is not even coming from the diversity and inclusion coordinator. It's coming from investor relations. Now, why is an investor relations person speaking to the boardroom about disability inclusion? Because disability inclusion has now become a new theme, a new metric in ESG, corporate social responsibility. And everyone knows, every company knows that they're now being measured and graded about how they perform along various climate issues, workplace issues, diversity and for women, ethnic, racial, people who identify as LGBTQ+, and yes, people with disabilities. The Business Roundtable 2 years ago included disability-owned business enterprises as part of their supplier diversity mandate. So just like women and minority-owned firms can now vie for business and contracting and services and companies, so too disability-owned and service-disabled disability-owned business enterprises can do so as well. So that's what's really driving this, is because investors are asking, and I think, and also individuals with disabilities themselves. So I think it's really exciting. I think that the biotechnology industry can be in the vanguard. As Laura, as you mentioned, we already have a number of major pharmaceutical companies. We're working on the small and mid-cap and so forth, biotech companies, but many of the major pharmaceutical companies, because they know, they see the shift, as Tony and Joyce was relating, throughout our country's history. People with disabilities, we had a medical model of viewing disability. So people with disabilities were looked at as kind of a medical diagnosis or somebody to be cured. We're saying, and Tony explained this in the last 10 or 15 years, we're now have adopted a more of a civil rights type model where people say it is not our physical or mental condition that creates the disability. Rather, it's societal attitudes, it's barriers, artificial barriers that are keeping people with disabilities from achieving their true potential. So there's this perception that's changing, and that's why I think the industry that is based on providing cures, providing therapeutics, can be even more. It's astounding that, and I mentioned this before, that very few people with disabilities are in the C-suite or on boards of directors for rehabilitation hospitals or for wheelchair companies. Do not have somebody with a wheelchair on the board of their company. There are pharmaceutical companies that are devoting their product to an orphan disease. And you know what? The idea of actually including maybe somebody with that condition in a leadership position of that company. That idea has never occurred to these senior executives, because people with disabilities are looked at as people to be cured, and people with disabilities do not want to be cured. They want, most people are fine living with their disability and would not change the fact that they had a disability. They want an equal opportunity to participate. And that is why the biotech industry can play a pivotal role in all of this.
Or if I could make a comment on what Ted just said, in all fairness, it's not just corporate America that doesn't include those of us with disabilities on their boards. A lot of the organizations for disability groups don't include the individual that they are actively working for on their board. Joyce and I happen to be very active in the epilepsy community. And I can say that the fight we've had to have was to get individuals with epilepsy on the epilepsy organizations. So this is a problem that's inherent throughout our society that we have to turn around, that those of us with disabilities, whatever that disability is, we can be helpful to an organization or to a company that's involved. And one other comment that Ted made, in that the organizations are being analyzed now. If you're in a corporation, and I happen to be on 4 corporate boards, but if those corporations are reviewed, analyzed by groups like ISS, and they look at all these corporations and what they are doing or not doing, they now, as Ted pointed out, are now addressing the whole issue of ESG, and that's, what are you doing in environment? What are you doing on societal issues, and so forth and so on? They're now asking those questions. So that's a new thing that has started now in the last couple of years. And on the boards that I'm serving on, we have to answer those questions now, which I think is great. And that's going to help us as going forward. But this whole thing about inclusion of those of us with disabilities goes across the board with the organizations for that disability, corporations, businesses in general. So it's a societal problem that we have to get around.
Tony, love that. Have our stakeholders, whether it's as an employee or a board member, let's get them involved. Drilling down to that idea, I think some of the people, have asked questions. How do we do this? So we hire people. We change our employment practices, ESG impact. We change our HR policies. We bring on folks with more disabilities. What needs to be done at a very granular level to make sure that they have those accommodations? Because I think the how is, it's down in the details. That's what's so critically important, once we make that happen. So Ted, Tony, Joyce, who wants to get started on that? But I'd love to hear some comments around that. How do we do it?
I'd like to let Joyce speak, because what she didn't say was that she is the leading national executive search firm for individuals with disabilities. She has placed, and Joyce, if you would elaborate, hundreds and hundreds of qualified individuals with disabilities in hundreds of corporations around the country. So Joyce, first of all, did I misspeak? Have you placed hundreds of people with disabilities in organizations around the country?
Well, before you answer that, Joyce, you also need to tell everybody how many people you have in your database. So it isn't just you being able to, somebody comes in, they want to hire somebody. You can go to your database of people that are there, and that's thousands of people. But go ahead and answer that as well.
Well, we have found employment, as Ted was alluding to, for thousands of people with disabilities across America, at all types, of industries, different industries, at all levels. One example of that, Ted referred me, he's on the board of this company, Innovage. I want to tell you what they did that's different than any company I work with. They had senior level positions, executive level positions, and they said, we specifically want you to find people with disabilities at that level. And see, that's what makes the difference, placing people at all levels. We have done this, you know, I have been across the world speaking at different countries, but to Tony's point, we have a database of over 40,000 people already, you know, vetted. They just need one thing, an opportunity to work. And you know what? When you don't hire someone with a disability, you're the one missing out. You know, Ted gave those examples of that data from Accenture, but you know what I always tell people? You just lost this chemist that you could have hired. There is this untapped labor pool of people that want to work, people that want to work, that are qualified, that are ready to go. It's that stigma that Tony talked about that has to change. So we go to companies and we recruit and place people with disabilities at all levels. We help them with the digital accessibility. We help them with training through iDisability. But the bottom line to all of this, you want to change, you want to make it happen, hire someone. Don't just talk about it. Don't look at all these answers. Don't look at all this, you know, people coming in to speak. Hire someone, because when you see a person with a disability working, that's what changes the work face at that company. Seeing people hired. You've got to hire people. That's where the rubber meets the road, employment. And you know what? You can start at a young level. The Bender Leadership Academy, we're working on youth with disabilities, getting opportunities and internships, to be apprenticed. I mean, there's so much you can do if you do one thing. What did Tony say? Open the door. Open the door. I love when Tony says that, give us the right to be fired, because what he's talking about is no pity. People with disabilities are tired of that. You know, Ted talked about the medical model. That's true. They're healthcare companies. They don't think of people with disabilities as people that can work and make a difference. They think of them as patients. We're not patients. We are employees that can work and make a difference. And you know what the difference is? We've got the power. We're not weak. We've got the power. So, Laura, turning it back over to you. But thank you, Ted.
Well, let me make one comment with what Joyce just said, and that is that when she talks about placing people with disabilities in corporations, actually, she's also talking about placing people in all these federal agencies. And the one that I like to refer to a lot is the National Security Agency. That agency, most of the people there have to have secret clearance, top secret clearance. So we're not talking about people that, you know, off the street or whatever. Joyce has these people that are trained and effective, and they go to the National Security Administration and they get a top clearance. I mean, we're talking about really trained quality people. And Joyce places, I think Joyce, I'm chair of an advisory board, I should know this, sorry, Joyce, but I think she places like 200 people at National Security Agency. And so that's something to remember. We're talking about real quality people here.
Yeah, that's the flip in the view that has to occur. Those people, I always say, if you can get hired by the NSA, think about that. Americans with disabilities protecting our country. So if they can do it, surely you can do it. And Ted, the one thing you said that is so true is sometimes we also do retained search. I'm very lucky to have Chris Griffin working with us. So we also do executive search. And we have gone to not-for-profits where they said, do they have to have a disability? And they work in disability. So, you know, here's our new thing. If you're not going to hire a person with a disability, we don't want your money. You've got to be kidding. That's like going to the NAACP and the chairman is white. I mean, you are a disability organization. The person at the top has to be a person with a disability. So you're right, Ted.
So this has been an absolutely amazing conversation, and it's been my great honor to, over the last couple months, get to know Joyce, Ted, Tony, and the amazing work that they've done and they've led for us and for the country for many, many decades. So at this point, this has been an amazing conversation, and I've learned so much during the conversation as well. But I'd like to open it up for questions. So you've got the national experts on this topic, and would love to be able to field any questions from anyone listening.
You can feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Hi, I have a quick question
We have
for you
one.
all.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So you had talked about people with disabilities and you not even understanding that there is a disability. What kind of environment do you need to create to make people feel more comfortable about being transparent?
Well, first of all, you can hire other people with disabilities, because it's very hard to go in and tell someone you're recruiting, hey, we really believe in hiring people with disabilities. You go to the company, but there aren't any other people with disabilities. So that to me would be number one. But then you do have to have your website accessible. You know, I remember when I heard Eve Hill say, when she was with the Department of Justice, how can you hire me if I can't get through the website to apply? So, you know, it's all of those things, including it's got to have representation at the leadership level. You can't just have people with disabilities working in one area. You have to see them at the leadership levels at organizations, and include people with disabilities in diversity. You know, the diversity and inclusion group, it can't be diversity and all groups except people with disabilities off to the side. That has to be part of your inclusion. I mean, this has happened to me many times with different companies, but you must include disability in diversity.
Laura, let me add to that. One of the things that we always hear about is that you need to provide accommodations for those of us with disabilities. And where that is the case, you should. But a lot of times what people do is they think accommodations, oh my God, that's so expensive. I don't want to go there. I don't want to open that door. Under the ADA, we put specific language in place. Something never been done legislatively before. We said the accommodations must be economically feasible. Ted's dad and I were, when we put that together, we wanted to make sure that accommodations didn't become a negative. If you're a mom and pop operation, or if you're a bio company or whatever, there are different requirements in regards to these accommodations. And so that's an important point to make sure we get across.
Ted, anything else to add?
I think Joyce and Tony, really responded to that question.
Okay, well, we have lots of questions from the audience, so I'm gonna just kind of fire them away, and I'll let one of you just pick up from the questions and the dialogue. Ted, Tony, Joyce, the ADA was signed into law 30 years ago. We've made progress during that time. As giants in our community, what is your vision in the next 30 years? Who'd like to start?
Well, let me start with that one. First off, you got to know that the ADA is a civil rights law. And the enforcement of that law is through the courts by you filing some action, or by the president's appointee as the attorney general and the appointee as the head of the civil rights division to enforce the law, so that action is taken against companies, actions taken against states or cities or whatever. So when you do the ADA, I get lots of comments to people who say, well, Tony, why don't you amend the ADA so that it requires you hire X number of people, or you do this or you do that? That's not what the civil rights law does. It's the enforcement of it that is what takes place. And we deliberately went after the basic civil rights with the ADA. So that's one concern that you have to take in consideration as you do this. But I tell you, in regards to your question, Laura, I think the next most important thing is doing something about the internet and the websites. That is, as I implied earlier, the interstate highway in effect for those of us with disabilities and for America. I mean, it's how we're growing and expanding in this country and all over the world, is through the internet and through websites and so forth. And we're not included. And that's the big thing that we have to really push and go after and so forth. And I'll just make one more comment, and that is we're stressing problems with corporations and hiring and so forth. And I like to be fair and across the board. It's a problem with governments, the federal government, state governments, local governments. It's not just a problem with corporations. And so right now we're involved in trying to get people with disabilities hired by the Biden administration. We've had trouble over the years with Democrats and Republican administrations and putting people with disabilities in high places. Look at Biden's cabinet. Is there a person with disability in that cabinet? No. And so I'm very upfront about this stuff. I don't care if it's Democrat, Republican. I don't care if it's corporation or government, but it's a problem across the board. And so we're trying to place people with disabilities in the Biden administration in a lot of different areas, but there is problems there as well as everybody else. So women in bio, you got to help us, not only in corporations, you got to help us politically in making sure that governmental organizations hire people with disabilities.
The only thing I would add is, to Tony's point, is you can't be what you can't see. I think that, for many, many years and decades in America, people with disabilities were not expected to go to work. Many people with disabilities, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. We ourselves took on the idea that we were incapable of working and so on. And so, it's going to take a while to achieve this social change, just like we have not realized the goal of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as evidenced by the turmoil now in our nation on race relations and so on. The same is it's going to take a long time, I think, to really address a lot of the stigma against people with disabilities. But while we have been successful in passing a lot of the state laws, and as Tony said, it's not a question of passing more laws on this and that. We also realize that that corporate engagement can be a new avenue of understanding that the top 100 economies of the world are not nations, that 50% of the top 100 economies are actually publicly traded companies. And so that is why we are working so hard to get to engage our corporate friends. There's many companies that have already taken these steps. We want to highlight the companies that are doing the right thing. We want to bring along new companies because I think that advancing the economic independence is so critically important, and there's a special role that companies can play in the creation of a more just and equitable society.
And Laura, let me make a comment based on what Ted just said. This is a personal comment. When I started having my seizures when I was 17 years old, my family then tried to protect me by not having me out in public having a seizure, because it was perceived by their community that if you had a seizure, you were possessed by the devil. That's true with a lot of people. It's true with the Catholic Church. I'm a devout Catholic. But the Catholic Church prevented, in canon law established in 400 AD, said if you had epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you couldn't be a priest. I wanted to become a priest. I got rejected because of that provision. And so it is a problem that's true across the world in so many different ways. And as a result of that, as Ted points out, we now, as a disabled community, we now fight for our rights and making those changes. And when I was in the Congress, I took a delegation to the Vatican, met with a Pope, Pope John Paul, and said that I thought it was unchristian of our church to have that provision in canon law. And he didn't respond, and he didn't bless me when he left, so I thought I was going straight to hell. But anyway, 2 years later, canon law was changed to permit people with epilepsy to become priests. So you got to speak up, you got to fight. Those of us with disabilities have to fight and have to make our point with no matter who is involved. And I speak to power. I have no trouble telling a president I think we're wrong. I have no trouble telling the Pope that I thought that he and the church were wrong. And those of us with disabilities now don't pay attention to what my mother and father felt. They wanted to put me aside and didn't want me to participate. I've had seizures for 60 years. I just had a seizure not too long ago, as Joyce knows, a grand mal seizure. But when you look at me, you don't see a disability unless I'm having a seizure, then you really see one. But you don't see me, but I have a disability and the discrimination is there. And those are the types of things we need to change.
And just,
I always tell, I'm sorry.
I know we're kind of running short on time, but I think the point that Tony made was very important. And that is the pride that now exists in the disability community. You know, we just celebrated Pride Month, I believe, across this country. And we
are celebrating that now.
Oh, are we still celebrating that?
Yes.
I didn't know it was still going on. Forgive me.
As a gay person, I understand that. Sorry, Ted.
So, but my point is this, just like people, just like our gay people were afraid to disclose and be proud of who they were ashamed of their feelings, and that's now changed. And so too it is, as Tony's saying, his parents, who they're trying to hide Tony from, from their neighbors and friends. And now Tony talks to everyone who he meets about his epilepsy. And so I think what's happened is people are proud of who they are. They're not trying to deny we're not trying to deny our condition. We believe that our experiences can be the greatest source of our strengths. And I think that's a really amazing change that's taken place over the last couple of decades.
And Laura, I would add this in closing. The disability rights community, the history, they have one big saying. And you know what that was? Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. Employment, boards, all areas. And I think that says so much. I hope you ask about 30 years from now. I hope someday we'll be looking back at this very event saying, do you know we used to have events about why you should hire people with disabilities? That's what my dream is, that will happen. Thank you, Laura.
Absolutely. Wow. Great messages. Proud, advocate, accommodations, let our companies thrive and survive. Absolutely amazing. I know there's lots more questions than time allows for this, but really appreciate Ted, Tony, Joyce for their lots and lots of time, and not just today, but over many, many decades. If you'd like to learn more about getting involved in this or having your company get involved, feel free to reach out to me. We put stuff in the chat about the disability and the roundtable. But if you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me. We can also arrange, I'm in the Capital Region as a co-chair of EWIB. I'm also, absolutely available to actually continue conversations at a regional level. Glad to continue this conversation. And again, many thanks to Joyce, Ted, and Tony, and also Women in Bio, Lisa, Kayla, and everybody else that made this event possible. Thank you so much for the ability to forward this conversation.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate it. And what a fantastic discussion that we had. I hope everyone can join us for our remaining events here at Bio. And again, I want to just thank PNC for their sponsorship for the Diversity and Inclusion Resource Group that Women in Bio has as a national resource. Please go check that out on our website. And again, thank you to Laura for moderating this fantastic event. Joyce, Ted, and Tony, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate having you present at this exciting event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kayla.